I think it is a really wonderful opportunity for us to have this, really powerhouse, specialist on China, the U.S., and Korea. And our government has always trying to have some kind of strategic dialogue among China, the U.S., and the Republic of Korea. But we have not been that successful in bringing the strategic dialogue among three countries. But I think that this Korea Foundation for Advanced Studies, has been quite successful in bringing those three parties together. In this sense, I think the foundation will make a very great contribution to facilitating cooperation among those three countries. Our session's topic is China-U.S. relations, or U.S.-China relations. In Korea, we always put the U.S. ahead of China. Therefore, it will take some time for us to put the China-U.S. relations. That really shows the kind of asymmetry between the China and the United States in the perception of Koreans. I think we have a really great speakers today. And on my immediate left side, Professor and Dr. Kenneth Lieberthal. He has taught at the University of Michigan for a long time, and also he worked at the White House as a China specialist at the National Security Council, and he has so many students who are so powerful and influential in South Korea too. Let us give a big applause to Professor Lieberthal. And his immediate left is Professor Dr. Feng from the CAS, Chinese Academy of Social Science. He is now Deputy Director of Institute of American Studies. And he has one of the leading scholars on the China-U.S. relations in China. Let us give big applause to Professor Feng. And Professor Zheng Jie of Seoul National University, you know him very well. He's Mr. China in South Korea. And he has been doing, but in fact, he's a specialist in Chinese political economy, but now he has turned into the security specialist too. And he spoke on South Korea between China and the United States, which came out of the Columbia University Press in 2007, I think. That has been one of the most influential books regarding China, U.S., and South Korea. Let us give a big applause to Professor Chung. And Dr. Jonathan Pollack, there's some kind of identity crisis here. We all thought that Jonathan is a Korean specialist because he has written very influential book on Korean unification. And at the same time, he recently completed a book on the North Korean nuclear quagmire. But originally, while he was working at Rand Corporation, he was a China specialist. And he is still China specialist, but therefore he's double dipping China and Korean studies. Let us give a big applause to Jonathan Pollack. And my old friend JIA Qingguo, Professor Jia is the Dean of School for International Studies at the Beijing University. Okay? And he's one of the earlier China scholars who studied in the United States. He got his PhD from Cornell University and taught at UC San Diego, ILPS, and also taught at the University of Sydney. And also, he's not only a scholar, he's also a political leader. He's a member of National Political Consultative Meeting, and he's very influential in the lawmaking process, too. Let us give big applause to the JIA Qingguo. And finally, but not least, is Professor Kim Tae-ho. You all know, he worked as a director of strategic planning of our Blue House, and he was most influential decision maker in foreign policy and national security policy of Lee government. Now he returned to the 성균관대 University as a professor of political science. Let us give a big applause to Kim Tae-ho. Now I will set the rule in this way. We have altogether about 100 minutes, but apparently Ambassador Park and Vice Minister Cho exceeded about 20 minutes, but I will try to retain in 100 minutes. I will give 10 to 12 minutes for each main speakers, and that will be followed by 5 to 7 minute talks by commentators, and then we'll have about 20-minute discussion among ourselves, and I will open flow for about 20 minutes. I will not take any oral questions on comments. We have too many here. We have altogether 900. Therefore, it is impossible for me, allow you to make oral, questions and comments. Therefore, I'll be picking up your written comments and questions, and then I will compile them and I'll raise a question to, panelists here. You can raise the general comments and questions, or you can specify which panelist you want to raise questions. Okay, Vala. Okay, Ken, your turn.
Thank you very much. It's a genuine pleasure to be a participant in this trilateral conference. This session focuses mostly on U.S.-China relations, rebalancing to Asia, and the new model of major power relations. Given that we only have about 10 minutes for each of the formal speakers, I think our goal is to set out a broad framework within which we can provoke a discussion. So let me proceed as follows. First of all, on the U.S. rebalancing to Asia. This is a notion that reflects the importance of the Asia-Pacific region for the United States and for the world, the most dynamic region in the world. It is an attempt to pursue a reasonably integrated economic, diplomatic, and both traditional and non-traditional set of strategies. The rebalance has often been called a pivot. The original policymakers who devised this strategy purposely called it a rebalance. It is not a pivot. It is a matter of balancing resources and attention in order to achieve a set of outcomes. Doesn't mean ignoring Europe or ignoring the Middle East is not contingent on dramatically focusing attention on only one region of the world. The new type of major power relations recognizes the importance of avoiding the trap that we've often seen in history of a rising power and an existing dominant power falling into conflict as the power balance between them shifts. This is therefore not a notion of a G2. It is not a notion that the United States and China will somehow dictate to other countries in the region and elsewhere what outcomes should be and how to get there. All of the countries would disagree with that if we ever were dumb enough, frankly, to embrace that notion. But it does focus on the need to enhance cooperation where possible and to take measures to limit tensions and to control potential conflicts. So the new type of major power relations effectively has to be handled well in order for the rebalancing strategy to be successful. Because the rebalancing strategy is one that seeks over a period of time to maintain the security, stability, and promote the economic integration of the Asia-Pacific region that will benefit everyone involved. A hostile U.S.-China relationship would make all of that beyond reach. The Sunnyland Summit highlighted the notion of a new type of major power relationship. And it reflected the reality embraced by both presidents that around the world, bilaterally, regionally, and globally, problems become more manageable when the U.S. and China either cooperate or at least act in parallel fashion, and become less manageable, indeed unmanageable, when we work directly across purposes with each other. I think the reality is both sides have followed up on that understanding and a commitment to improve cooperation and reduce tension between us where we can. We have increased our scope and intensity of military-to-military engagement. That has really broadened dramatically since Sunnylands. We have increased the institutionalization of our diplomatic dialogues across the board. The United States now counts well over 60 bilateral formal dialogues that we have every year. Chinese somehow or other come up with over 90. I'm not sure how the counting is being done, but the reality is that at a cabinet or sub-cabinet level, our two governments interact every week. Our key officials know each other well. There is an extraordinary scope of discussion that occurs, and even the major dialogue, the security and economic dialogue, has moved from a once-a-year event to setting up a set of working groups, bilateral working groups to handle key issues, a process that continues throughout the year. Economically, a lot is going on beneath the surface. We have a very active bilateral investment treaty negotiation, an agreement that will be based on what's called a negative list approach. Technical issues have largely been resolved, and that negotiation is now moving forward. One of the major economic dimensions of the U.S. effort toward Asia is the Trans-Pacific Partnership negotiations. China, until last spring, regarded that almost wholly negatively as a U.S. effort to wall off a major part of Asia where we would have a trade and investment advantage to China's detriment. I think the Chinese view on that has become more forward-leaning. And the hope eventually, from a U.S. perspective, is that we complete this agreement, it be a high-quality agreement, and eventually that China become a member of that agreement, and that it will eventually lead to an Asia-Pacific investment and trade platform that will benefit everyone. My sense is in China, at least some top officials see this also as a potential vehicle for accomplishing what WTO entry accomplished for China a little over a decade ago, which is to leverage the terms of entry in order to promote the reforms at home that top leaders now wish to see occur. So I think overall U.S.-China relations are in more solid shape than most of the media and much of the casual commentary recognizes. There are obviously tensions and issues, but I think the fundamentals are in fact quite robust. The relationship is more institutionalized now than it was several years ago. And the leadership on both sides have made very plain that this relationship should not head south, that it should move forward. But there are risks now that I think are potentially larger and more consequential than has been the case for many years. And we have panels later on that take up each of these, so let me just highlight to me the key concern in each case. There are two issues here that could be what I call black swan events. In other words, events that are very low probability, very likely will not produce the worst outcome. But if they occur, can be game changers in the region, can have huge impacts. The two of those in Northeast Asia, I think clearly are first, the Sino-Japanese situation regarding Diaoyu or Senkaku, what I call the DS Islands dispute. The problem here is not an inability to reach agreement on the issue of sovereignty. I think that's a long-standing problem that's not going to be resolved anytime soon. The problem is an unwillingness on each side to move forward to find ways to reduce the chances of accident or incident in the immediate region of these disputed islands, and to have crisis management mechanisms, channels of communication and so forth in place in case there is an accident or incident. Each side, when I talk to officials about this, they always say the atmosphere is not right. But the problem is that if there is accident or incident that causes a loss of life, not intentional conflict, but accidental loss of life, it could produce a crisis that could quickly escalate. And I'll make a simple statement now, and we'll be happy to elaborate later if anyone wants to raise a question about it. There is no scenario for escalation of this crisis that produces a better situation for any of the potential parties involved, for China, for Japan, or for the United States, which could get pulled into this. Secondly, a North Korea originated crisis. My sense is no one has a very good understanding of either Kim Jong-un's plans or his capability in terms of keeping control over a situation, and even where there is a provocation that gets a response, managing that so that it doesn't escalate further. My concern here in the U.S.-China context is that the U.S. and China have not developed a good understanding of each other's potential responses to various possible contingencies on the Korean Peninsula. And that is a kind of conversation that I think needs to occur. Briefly, in the South China Sea, the U.S.-China distrust here has actually increased a fair amount. That's because of dynamics in the region. It's gotten to the point where a public U.S. recommendation that Beijing clarify its position on the famous 9-dash line that it appears on its maps has produced dark analyses in China about U.S. intentions in raising that quite obvious issue. Repercussions in the coming months of developments in the Ukraine are potentially wide-ranging. We don't know what's going to happen there yet, so the future has a lot of possibilities to it. Beijing may be tugged in very different directions, and the decisions that China makes can prove very consequential for U.S.-China relations. This is another one of those developments that forces attention outside of the immediate Asian region, but involves potential future trust and cooperation between the United States and China. A lot of this is not predictable. These are things that could go wrong. If they go wrong, are consequential. And they are all events that I've listed with the thought that these could become very important issues within the next 1 to 2 years if they go wrong. Let me therefore conclude with a longer-term time horizon. The longer-term time horizon is really just to raise one core issue. At the end of the day, when you look at what will shape U.S.-China relations and what will shape this region, assuming that there is not war on the Korean Peninsula or a black swan event that really goes in the wrong direction, probably the most fundamental thing to follow will be the degree of success of China's domestic economic and related reforms, which will determine to a substantial extent China's capabilities and its politics as we go out a decade and beyond. And relatedly, because the U.S. has its own economic problems, the degree of success of our system in dealing with our issues of debt and so forth that we have to deal with in order to realize the potential vibrancy and dynamism of the United States going forward. So that is an issue, a kind of not bet, but analysis of how successful each side will be in dealing with its core domestic reform needs, I think fundamentally will shape a lot of what we see in this region and in U.S.-China relations as we go forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let us give a big applause. Okay, Professor.
Thank you very much for the abundant. I feel the great honor is be invited by the Korea Foundations. Since last year, I think about the major power relation, new type of major power relation, I think in China, strategic commitment and maybe a committee, I think is a very hard topic, especially in the Sunny Land meeting. President Xi Jinping and Obama, to some extent, reached some consensus about to push such relation. I think there are a lot of discussion in China. In my presentation, I want to talk about in this process to realize the new type of relation between the China and the States. What is the opportunity? What is the challenge? Because the time is maybe limited. Maybe I have time to talk about the opportunity. About the opportunity, I think I raised about 5 points. I think the first 1 point maybe seems to be maybe the most very important and the biggest the opportunity as Sino-US relations itself. How to say? I think despite there are quite a lot of the problem and the trouble in the bilateral relations, generally speaking, I think the Sino-US relations since 1972. This is a very successful relation. Both countries get a great benefit from it. Since the President Xi Jinping, when he met the Vice President Joe Biden at end of last year, he described the Sino-US relation as the sky crop. I think in the economic areas, both countries as deeply interdependent. At the last years, the trade between the countries has reached about 52 billion US dollars. It's huge trade. I think maybe in there's quite great potential also in the future. For example, since the beginning of this year, both countries have negotiated about the bilateral investment treaty. I think at the last SNED, both governments began to talk about how to the United States export the shale gas to China. I think consider at present in China, especially in Beijing, and the north part and the east part of China is quite a serious air pollution. I think in these areas, this cooperation space is quite huge. It's the economic areas. I think on the bilateral, region, and the international level, I think both countries have shared more and more common ground. And also, I think between the two governments, nearly 100 dialogue mechanism has been established. I think as a China and the U.S. relation is quite a mature and a tendency relation, I think. This is the first opportunity. Second opportunity, I think, is about China has another attention to challenge and replace the American leadership. I think China's leader is often reiterate such a statement. For example, as Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi, when he visited to the Brookings at the last year, he also mentioned this intention. It's the Chinese government, the attitude to the state. About Chinese public attitude to Americans, I want to cite my former boss as Madam Zhe Zongyun. He is very interesting and the classical summaries about the Chinese public to the attitude to the stage. He is very famous American hand in China. He said the Chinese like American, but they dislike American foreign policy. This is the Chinese attitude to the American. This is the second opportunity. Third opportunity, I think, since last year, there's a mule-to-mule relation between the two countries. I think made great progress. I think since the last year, I think more than 60 military exchange have been arrangement, which include the top military leaders' visit, the warship visit, and joint exercise, including this year's the Chinese PLA, we're participating the Ring-Pacific military exercise. I think, in addition, I think the Chinese attitude to mule, this attitude becomes much more positive than before. For example, as at the last August, Chinese Defense Minister General Chang Wen-chun visited to the stage. He raised two initiatives. One initiative is he suggested one of the advanced notification of the major military activities. Another initiative is about both countries as talk about the code of the conduct between the two armies. I think this is a great progress for our. This is a third opportunity. The fourth opportunity I think is on the hard sport issues, the gap between the two countries as narrowing down. I take the two examples. First is about the North Korean nuclear issue. As we know, as a Chinese policy to the Korean Peninsula, they have two goals. One of is keep this peninsula stable. Another one is denuclearization. I think that before the third nuclear test, Chinese government pay more attention about the stable. I think after the third nuclear test, Chinese stressed on the denuclearization. I think that on this issue, the both countries overlap as increase, not a decrease. I think this is one. Another example is Afghanistan issue. I think in these years, the American will withdraw Afghanistan. Afghanistan also is a Chinese neighbor country. Keep these areas stable. I think the benefit for China also for the United States. So I think in these years, China will hold the international conference on about the Afghanistan. This is the fourth opportunity. The last opportunity I think is maybe as a freedom navigation, maybe as a greater potential cooperation areas for China and the state. Of course, freedom navigation seems to be one of the focus and core between China and states, especially just Mr. Kenneth mentioned the South China Sea. But we from the big picture to view this issue about the freedom of the navigation. For example, I think this maybe is a great common ground for us. For example, at the last years, China exceeded the U.S., become the biggest country of the trade in the world. In this meantime, about the 87% Chinese trade with his partner, really on the Mediterranean line. So how to enhance the cooperation to ensure the freedom navigation maybe it's very important for topic between us. I have time to talk about?
We have just 2 more minutes.
2 more minutes.
But you can 3 more minutes.
I talk about the opportunity. I think about the challenge, at least about the 6th challenge. Because challenge, I talk about the 1 challenge. This challenge is about I think maybe it's the biggest challenge for us to build the new type of relation between two of us, which is American pivot to Asia and China was to China rising. I think in China, the mainstream attitude to the American pivot to Asia is at least is partially armed at China. It's the mainstream China's attitude to this action, American pivot. I think in the meantime, American as view China, rising China, they say China has become more and more assertive. So I think both sides the views I may be very easily resolve some kind of the distrust, competition, and some kind of the security dilemma. I think about China and the state want to to establish some kind of the new type relation. I think how to deal with the challenge, maybe as the biggest challenge. Because time, I'll stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Professor Chung Jae-ho.
Thank you. I'd like to start by thanking the organizers and echoing the other panelists about the importance of having this trilateral conference, which I think is very important from Korean perspective. What I'm going to offer is a sort of third-party perspective, because already there has been American and Chinese perspective presented. So I'll just throw out a couple of thoughts and share with you. I think the East Asia and Northeast Asia in particular is now plagued with what I would call the specters and goblins that are coming out of the Pandora's box because of the demise of the Cold War. We have territorial disputes, identity clashes, historical controversies, and so on and so forth. And I think the US and China, to a certain extent, are lacking an Asia-Pacific strategy. Of course, there are certain concepts, but I'm not quite sure whether US and China really have an Asia-Pacific or Northeast Asia strategy to speak of, other than peace and stability. I think it is very easy for the United States and China to agree on what peace is, but I do not think two countries have come to a consensus on what the stability is. So in that sense, the status quo is on a quicksand, and particularly given the fact that China is fast telescoping the entire process of growth, not only in economic realms, but increasingly in the military realms as well. If you look at the J-20, J-31, anti-ship ballistic missiles and so on, of course there is still a much gap between US and China, but even that is being bridged quite fast because China has been developing leapfrogging technologies and so on. As for China's foreign policy, I would I have coined this term, the proactive reactivism. Overall, it seems to me that Chinese diplomacy has been reactive, mostly. In other words, China has been reacting to what other states have been doing, at least up to now. But since 2009, or from 2010, the frequency of China using a more assertive diplomacy has been increasing. So that's why I'm calling this a proactive reactivism. If you look at Foreign Minister Wang Yi's remarks a few weeks ago, I think it's very evident. He has used the term 主动进取, which is a proactive forwarding approach. It's difficult for you to find a trace of usual modesty or humility that you find in Chinese policy announcements before. He also used the term 主场, which is China should use China as a main venue for diplomacy. In other words, China is going to have more say and more presence in the entire stage of global diplomacy. I would like to draw your attention to one interesting episode, I would say, that happened in Annenberg last year. When President Obama met with President Xi Jinping, I think it was over dinner, President Xi Jinping said, the Pacific is big enough for both China and the United States. Of course, he was making this remark in a very favorable context because there was an old saying in China, there's 一山不容二虎, two tigers cannot coexist in one mountain. So he was actually making a rebuttal to this Chinese old saying. But at the same time, I don't know whether he was aware of this or not, but he became the first foreign leader to say this to the United States since 1945. We have some claims to a right to use Pacific. So does this, is this a good news for the Pacific as a whole? Will the Pacific Ocean be Pacific down the road? So that is one concern from a third-party perspective. And also, I would like to take note of the level of distrust. Ken just mentioned about BIT, which was talked about in the negative list approach and so on in the fifth strategic and economic talks. But at the same time, there was a high note of distrust, particularly from American enterprises which were willing to invest in China, but they were very worried about cybersecurity in China and so on. So the level of strategic distrust is still very high, and it's not quite clear how that can be mitigated in the future. Not to speak of the increasing frequency at which US and China are sort of showing a competitive manifestation, let's say impeccable and cow pens and so on. So from a third-party perspective, it is possible for us to be concerned about the possibility in which Washington and Beijing are increasingly sort of locked in. I can give you like 4 or 5 different domains. First of all, rebalance. Ken has elaborated very well on this. But rebalance is basically, it's not totally about China, but the lion's share of rebalance is indeed about China. But on the other hand, China is saying rebalance is not necessary because China's peaceful rise will be peaceful. Therefore, there is no need for America's rebalance or a sort of a balanced role for the United States. In order to implement a rebalance strategy, the United States is consolidating its alliances with its allies and also forming a new security relationships with many countries, particularly in Southeast Asia. But China is also extending its partnership. It has increased the number of strategic partners around the world. We all know about this TPP RCEP issue, although China has shown some changes in its approach toward TPP, but fundamentally, I think the differences are still there. What is more interesting is the evolving military strategies of the United States and China. China has come up with this A280, anti-access and area denial, which can be exchangeable with the term of counter-intervention. Then US also has come up with a sort of counter strategy, which is air-sea battle. Both strategies are evolving, and it's quite difficult to really lay out what they really are. But both strategies are hinged upon very interestingly common platforms. Let's say anti-satellite attack capabilities or anti-ship ballistic missiles, or how to prevent those, as well as the cyber warfare. So even in military terms, there are certain explicit interactive effects between Washington, D.C., not to speak of normative conflicts, which are abbreviated as Washington Consensus versus Beijing Consensus. Now, how are regional states positioning themselves between the United States and China, including South Korea? I think diverse modes of responses are manifest by regional states, including bandwagoning, balancing, and hatching, and so on. But I think, particularly since 2009 or 2010, the number of bandwagoners with the rise of China has been decreasing, while the number of hatchers and number of balances against the rise of China has been increasing. I think the regional states have growing dual concern. I mean dual, because China, the regional states are concerned about China's assertive, if not yet aggressive, assertive diplomacy toward the region. And at the same time, regional states are concerned about the rising level of tension between the US and Japan on one hand, and China on the other. But much of this is actually beyond the regional states' control, because regional states cannot do much about what is actually happening between Washington and Beijing, because ASEAN doesn't really have a uniform or unified strategy toward the rise of China. They are divided themselves, not to speak of the situation that Korea and Japan are situated right now. But one thing is for sure, almost all the regional states are opposed to what I would call the exclusivity question. Are you with us or with them? Whether China or the United States asks that question first, that power will be considered as a more serious threat to the regional states. I'll stop there.
Thank you very much. From now on, From now on, no applaud, okay? The commentators, so that we can save time too. Jonathan.
Thank you very, very much, Jung-in, and it is a genuine pleasure to be here today at this really quite extraordinary and even unprecedented gathering, convened with thanks, of course, to KFAS and to Ambassador Park. Although the theme of our meeting is trilateral, this is essentially a bilateral panel, although coming from multiple perspectives. And I think that the reasons for that are pretty self-evident. The United States and China will be the world's dominant economic and perhaps military powers for as far as the eye can see. It's not a G2 world, nor is it a multipolar world in the classic sense of the term, because the power capacities of the US and China will far exceed that, I believe, of any other two states. So either these two countries and their leaders get this relationship right, or if they do not, we are headed into a much less certain global and regional future. So the stakes are very, very high. We've seen in all the presentations this morning have highlighted the obvious incentives for the US and China to find ways to cooperate. And indeed, in various respects, as we've been reminded by the speakers, there are extraordinary, even again, unprecedented levels of interaction at an economic level, in terms of educational exchanges, scientific exchanges, and maybe most important, at a government level. If you talk to officials in either the United States or China, you certainly get a sense of a very, very active, ongoing set of interactions, including, as has been noted, at the military-to-military level. And yet, why don't we feel better about this? There is a vague sense of unease that we are in some measure at a gestational point in international politics that leaves things vastly unsettled. Appropriately, Chen Jie-ho has highlighted the exchanges between President Xi and President Obama at Sunnylands, but that in and of itself is an interesting question. No doubt in a pure physical sense, there's plenty of room for both powers in the Pacific, but is there a common identity, a concept, joint ownership, if you will, of a means that we go from here to there that could enable the kind of cooperation between the US and China without undermining the interests of other states in the region, which include, among other things, of course, Japan as the world's third biggest economy, and other very, very significant economies, including, obviously, the Republic of Korea, perhaps the 12th or 13th biggest in the world. All of this is amidst what I would see a time, often this expression of assertiveness is used and is directed at China, but in my view, all the nations of Northeast Asia are being assertive in one way or another. We see leaders who feel empowered within their own national contexts, pursuing their longer-term goals and ambitions, sometimes, frankly, without clear regard for its consequences for neighbors. So the question is, of course, how do we find in this competitive environment, and I know competition gets a bad name. Some would say even competition in a Chinese linguistic context connotes something more adversarial. But competition is inherent in the human condition, and in international politics, the question is one more of whether it can be realistically managed. In all of this, I would say, this is no longer simply the question of how leaders and governments define these issues. We are in this era where everyone's opinion seems to count, or at least can be expressed. The multiplicity of those voices, I think, in various countries, including between the United States and China, has at times a very undermining quality in the relationship. I'm not trying to say that the views expressed, whether by scholars or in the media, has equivalent standing to what governments do, but we can't ignore that as a fact of life that shapes perceptions and maybe misperceptions of intent and direction. All of this at a time when global politics seems increasingly unsettled. We've talked here this morning about the U.S. rebalancing policy. Many are wondering now whether this is in some measure an unbalanced rebalance, or perhaps not exactly what was bargained for in the process. But I think a candid discussion about the possibilities here and whether or not there is a common ground on which the United States and China can meet is still, in my view, an open question. Both countries favor what we might call bumper stickers. America's bumper sticker is the rebalance. China is the new concept of major power relations. And as Ken Lieberthal has highlighted appropriately, the two either find a way to work in conjunction with one another, or you're not going to get to a particularly happy outcome. But all of these things are more at a very broad conceptual level, not in the context of practice, because it is in practice, it is in terms of the real contingencies and possibilities that I think the realities of this relationship, the possibilities of this relationship, will be defined in the years to come. So I would add also the question of will there be a singular dominant focus to the U.S.-China relationship? Chen Jieho has just mentioned the kinds of concepts that are being bandied about in the military realm. I would argue, to the extent that a military competition defines the U.S.-China relationship, that we will have failed. And by we, I mean everyone involved in this process. So I think in all of this, we need to, in some sense, find a way to reconcile, if we can, the kinds of divergent visions. They are not perfectly symmetrical visions that states have about their intentions and perceptions of one another, their goals, their aspirations. Either we find a way to do this intelligently and in long-term fashion, or I would argue that the extraordinary success that Northeast Asia has achieved over the last several decades, if not at overt risk, could potentially be undermined in years to come. And that is not going to be anything that any one country can solve. It's whether or not states can, in some measure, not only looking at their own agendas, but embed them in a larger concept of a shared or collective sense of the stakes that are involved. That is what I look to that has to be clearly addressed and identified in the years to come. In this regard, I must say, in closing, that the opportunity that we have here is the indulgence, if you will, of being able to think broadly and talk openly about these matters. We're not here representing our governments. Let's use the opportunity to highlight the stakes, the risks, and the uncertainties that I still think heavily define the U.S.-China relationship in the years to come. Thank you.
Thank you. Qingguo?
Well, thank you very much. It's a great honor to be here, and thank you, Ambassador Park, for this opportunity. I agree with most of the points previous speakers have made. I noticed the relationship in the assessment. There are positive side and negative side. I also noted that there is a different emphasis with Ken and Feng emphasizing a little more positive on the developments, and Jieho's a little bit less positive assessment of the development of the relationship. I think it's a matter of perspective, depending on where from which angle you look at it. I want to make this point. That is, I think there has been a change in the relationship especially in recent years. Now, there are fewer disagreements between China and the United States, not only on the direction of China's reforms, domestic reforms, but also on the content of the reforms. So if you look at, if you read, if you listen carefully to what our previous speakers' comments, very few differences between China and the United States on China's domestic issues are mentioned. We're talking about more disputes instead on foreign policy fronts. That's an interesting change. Actually, the U.S. government has positively endorsed the reform proposals outlined in the third plenary session of the 18th Party Congress. It's very interesting. And despite increasing cooperation between the two countries on foreign policy issues, there is, I notice, a persistent and even increasing uneasiness and frustration with regard to the way the other country conducts foreign policy on certain geopolitical issues, especially in East Asia. We're talking about maritime disputes, we're talking about ADIZ, we're talking about the U.S. role in this region, we're talking about China's intentions, as Americans try to speculate. There is another aspect to this. I noticed that there is a divergence in terms of how to communicate with China, especially on the part of the U.S. The Obama administration. Different style. One is a more sensitive and more polite, trying to communicate your position, your views, especially those different views, in a sensitive, diplomatic, and polite way, as we just saw in the First Lady's visit to China. Her speech was well received in China, even though she made the Obama administration's point very clearly. That is, we need more freedom in terms of exchanges of views between the two countries, and including the internet freedom. It's very interesting. The way she presented the views somehow led to a positive reception in China. But then there is another view, another way to communicate. That is, we want to make sure that there is no ambiguity. So it's a clear, forthright, straightforward, frank presentation of U.S. perspective, and try to clarify any misunderstanding. An example of this was the recent remarks by Mr. Medeiros at the Brookings last week. She was saying that China's foreign ministry's remarks about what Obama had said about its China policy was not accurate. So he was quite forceful and straightforward. That's a very different style. But then my hunch is that it was not well received in China. Okay. The new type of great power relationship, what does it refer to? I think China sends out mixed messages. It says, well, major power relationship refers not only to the China-U.S. relationship, but also to other China's relationship with other powers. Personally, I think China probably should be more focus on the China-U.S. relationship, because we are talking about how to avoid a situation in which the rising power and the existing established power to manage their relationship during the period of peacefully in the period of power transition, rather than just any average major power relationship. So that point should be made clear. What does it mean, new type of major power relationship or great power relationship between China and the United States? I think that it means two things. One is to avoid confrontation. The other is to increase cooperation. It's easier to do the first one. It's more difficult to engage in the second part, to fundamentally change the nature of the relationship between the two countries. I guess China and the United States, when we talk about new type of great power relationship, there are all kinds of different interpretations, but then I think it should be interpreted as a desire to do what is necessary to avoid the so-called Thucydides trap, okay? The potential conflict between the rising power and the established power. The second is it should be interpreted as an attempt to promote cooperation to address bilateral, regional, and global concerns of the two, especially between the two countries. Thirdly, it should be interpreted as a general policy approach or orientation rather than specific set of policies. We're not talking about specific set of policy. It's a major policy orientation or approach. Finally, it should be regarded as an intention to develop mutual respect, but not specific commitments on any given set of issues. Those issues should follow, but then those commitments should follow, but not as a precondition of mutual respect. How should the two countries go about it? I think we should think about each other from a more benign perspective instead of from worst-case scenarios. I think that's very important. The way you perceive things may eventually lead to what you get. And also, they should reassure each other not only through nice rhetoric, but also through cooperation on various specific issues. Okay. I appreciate the administration's demand. That is, okay, it's fine. We should talk about have a new type of great power relationship. But what should we do on this issue or that issue? I think China should think very carefully about, for example, how to apply this new type of great power relationship to our handling of the North Korean issue, nuclear issue. And then the two countries should address the differences between them in a considerate manner, okay? Through private communication and consultation, rather through public criticism, especially when we have different opinions. And finally, to be sensitive to each other's domestic political concerns. Okay? I remember one of the American leaders, in one comment in a meeting with a small group of Chinese specialists, I was there, and he said, China and the U.S. Should learn to help each other. We all have domestic politics, right? When we meet a difficult problem, we need to learn how to, help the other side to address their domestic concerns. I remember reading something that Zhou Enlai said to, immediately after Nixon's visit to China. He said to some Chinese officials, he said, in charge of propaganda, he said, we should not exaggerate. We should not stress too much the success we have achieved because of Nixon's visit. So China, how China benefited from this, because this may make it difficult for Nixon when he went back to the U.S. So he was trying to be considerate, right? Trying to help Nixon, and by helping Nixon, China also helped itself. So I think this is a way. This is probably a way that the leaders of the two countries should bear in mind when dealing with each other. Okay. Finally, what needed to be done? I think I want to end this with a remark by Kissinger. One of our students raised the question to Dr. Kissinger. He said, "How should we manage our relationship?" Dr. Kissinger was very wise in his response. He said, "The U.S. should learn how to adapt to the rise of China, and China should learn how to appreciate the limits of its power." A very wise, realistic suggestion. I think, well, I agree with him on this. I think China has a lot to learn. The U.S. has a lot to learn about this transition, how to, not necessarily sort of China overtaking the U.S., but at least this uncertainty created by the perceived transition or eventual or real transition. But anyway, there are a lot of challenges that both countries have to face in order to develop a peaceful relationship between the two countries for the benefit of the world as well as the two countries. Thank you.
Thank you. Hale?
I'm not sure if we have enough time to have a free discussion, but I limit my remarks in 5 minutes to allow more feedbacks and free discussions. After listening a 3 presenters' review over a new type of major country relationship between the U.S. and China, I'd like to raise more issues about what has to be done rather than reviewing and analyzing the ongoing social science phenomena. Well, a new type of major relationship between the two countries, I think majorly refer to only Asia-Pacific region, because China does not have yet a global alliance network, and China has not raised a Chinese-style global value diplomacy so far. So China's a growing power in terms of its economic capability and energy security, and it's propelling a national power criteria still is limited to its power projection capability in the region, and also China's specific approaches to energy security and other economic relations. I think the key is China's type of social, democratic leadership, and its future flexibility and its capability to handle its own domestic challenges in the future. If China's type of social democratic leadership works better, I think that will promise China's more promising global roles and responsibilities in the future. And otherwise, I think China will meet a variety of challenges and threats in the future. So for me, that will be the key research agenda to tell the future U.S.-China relations. Many people worry about power transition, and China specialists focus on China rising, and U.S. specialists focus on U.S. leadership and solid alliance. But I think whether China becomes number one or whether U.S. keeps its hegemonic leadership to the later part of this century, I think the certain prospects will be that some sort of rivalry between these two countries, and they have to mix up a cooperation and competition into the later part of this century, because nobody can expect that one of these countries will exclusively dominate the global order. So we have still 86 years left for this country. So one scenario that's dominated by one of these countries, I guess, will never happen in 100 years. So that type of drastic scenarios should be dealt with by our next generations. By that time, none of us will be alive. So we don't have to worry about a transition between these two countries, because these two countries anyhow have to mingle together into the later part of this century. So under this assumption, I think Korea have to look at its own national interest rather than just watching the balance of power and changing policies by China and the United States. Korea has three purposes. One goal is peace in and around the peninsula. Second one is prosperity. Third one is reunification. In order to achieve these fundamental three goals, we watch China, we watch United States, we watch Russia, and we watch Japan. But I'm arguing that we do not have to change any Korean strategy by looking at the power shift between China and the United States, or by looking at any policy shifts by US or China, because Korea's leverage and its own strategy comes from its own internal balancers, roles, and its contribution to regional stability. Based upon very constructive and solid alliance relationship with the United States, Korea can promote and expand China's peaceful roles in the region, and also encourage Japan and Russia to participate in a small multilateral or a bilateral security cooperation networks in this region. But the problem is a loss aversion phobia by the US and China. Currently, US enjoys its alliance relationship with Korea and Japan, and also US enjoys FTA relationship with ROK. Currently, China enjoys its friendly relationship with North Korea, and also using this territory as a buffer zone with the US power and Chinese own mainland territory. But future, China have to worry about the disappearance of North Korea. But at the same time, China can anticipate more and win-win market and economic relationship with a unified Korea. US can worry about the different and weakened alliance with Korea, but at the same time, you can expect more human rights and free democracy oriented networks expanded toward a northern side. So if Korea can handle and manage and take initiative to show a more future oriented new challenges and spaces for mutual cooperation for both China and the United States, I think Korea can continue and cultivate its own more creative and productive diplomacy, both with the United States and China. And finally, I think Korea have to make a more wise balance among nationalism, national interest, and value diplomacy. To me, it seems that Korea focuses too much on public opinion and the nationalism. So I have to advise that Korean government and public opinion should take care of more the side of national interest and human rights issues and other value issues to make a balance between emotion and the mutual and national interest. And also climate change issues and future energy security issues is not the issue of current trouble, but the future economic issues for everybody in the region. Thank you.
The floor can prepare your written comments or questions, and then the managers here will be picking up. Okay. Meanwhile, I will raise a couple of questions. Ken, both Feng and JIA Qingguo explained about the new model of major power relations, but still, it's not clear to me. How do you interpret it? Really, because I think that Qingguo has given a good list of what is meant by the new power relations, but it's not clear to me. But it's a very important signature policy of President Xi Jinping. But what is the Chinese perception of this new model of major power relations?
Well, I will say there is an area of, I think, agreement and an area of disagreement over what this means between the U.S. and China. The area of agreement is that we both recognize that we will both do better if we engage across the board, if we're able to communicate what our real concerns are and our goals, and if we can develop ways to either work in parallel or to, for example, regarding North Korea, to reduce the chances of a really dramatic crisis occurring. Where I think we disagree, or at least we're not quite on the same page, is in two elements. One is, if you notice, everyone points back to Sunnylands, to the Sunnylands Summit as the kind of birthplace, if you will, or say birthplace of the notion of a new type of major power relationship. If you look at the briefings that each side did immediately after Sunnylands, the Chinese foreign minister briefed, and I think he mentioned the term new type of major power relations somewhere between 10 and 20 times during his briefing. The U.S. National Security Advisor briefed on the same summit. I think he never mentioned the term. It isn't that we disagree over substantively what we are trying to achieve, but China has a style of trying to characterize a relationship in terms of, in normative terms, or not normative, prescriptive terms. So this is what we ought to do, and here's how we encapsulate it. The United States never does that as a matter of diplomatic style. We have a special relationship with Britain, but other than formal alliances or formal partnerships, we don't characterize every relationship in terms of the kind of partnership and what we should be seeking to achieve. So there's a kind of difference of style that I think is becomes a problem in that the Chinese tend to think if we don't use the term, then we must not be agreeing with them on the objectives. And the U.S. tends to think if you keep insisting on the term, better to focus on getting things done together, and let's build trust that way.
I really don't think this is a matter of style. Maybe we can raise the issue to maybe Jeho can elaborate on the point. But the way I understand was what happened in Sunnyland is this. President Xi Jinping gave a very clear-cut, three agenda of a new type of great power relations, major power relations. First, recognize China as a major power. Second, honor and respect vital interest or key interest of China. And third, let us compete and cooperate together. But apparently, the President Obama didn't give a very clear answer to that questions. And is it true or is it wrong interpretation? But that was the way it was reported in Korean mass media. Definitely, the U.S. was trying to evade from the Chinese demand. Okay. What did you take on that one? Maybe.
That is not the briefing I got.
Oh, that is not the briefing you got. Okay, Jeho, what did you third-party observation of what happened?
Well, I think there were more than three things talked about. I think for the United States, it's not a big deal to recognize China as a major power. I mean, even the term G2 originated from somebody who is American. But if you actually look at the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs website, this term is not translated as major power. It's actually new model of major country relations. But the initial translation was major power, but they changed it after 2 weeks. So I found still a little trace of modesty there. So I think there is some sort of confusion even on the side of China regarding that fact. But more importantly, what is in this agreement is that U.S. is not willing to accept China's core interest. Then without that condition being met, how can the U.S. and China actually achieve a situation where they both can win? So that's the question I still have.
Feng, any comments on that?
I try to talk about my
Will you
understanding.
put the microphone closer?
I try to talk about my understanding about China's qualities about the new type relation between the United States and China. I think recently, I think along with China's the national street as approach the United States, I think between the China and the States, the relation, we had quite a lot of the competition, uncertainty, and some kind of becomes more important and complicated. So from the Chinese side, I think managing these bilateral relations becomes more and more important, more difficult for us. Device we have nearly about 100 mechanism dialogue, but managing this regulation, I think, is really difficult. So I think from this perspective, China is want to find some kind of a new message to new framework to manage this bilateral relation. I think this is from China's perspective to pursue the new type of relation with the United States. I think about realize this goal. I think need some time. Some people is clear. Some people is not so much clear. So I think maybe there's an interaction between the two both of us to looking for some effective method to build this type of relation. I think.
Qingguo, what did you know? Now I'm asking just a different question. Okay, since we talked about the new model of major power relations, what did you take of this Obama's pivot to Asia or rebalancing to Asia? Because the way, if we see that the way can describe the pivot to Asia or rebalancing to Asia, it is very beneficial one. Okay, it aims at achieving peace, stability, and common prosperity. Do you agree with his observation? Why China is so sensitive to the idea of rebalancing to Asia?
Well, I just want to make one point before I answer your question. That is, I think it's not that the U.S. does not want to respect China's core interests. I think Obama administration has a problem of, letting Chinese to say what the core interests are. Okay, so there is a concern about China, expand the list of core interests and define core interests in a way that the U.S. cannot manage. With regard to the U.S. rebalance to Asia, policy to rebalance to Asia, I think it's natural for the U.S. to attach a greater importance to the Asia-Pacific region. This is the most economically dynamic region. The U.S. interests and stakes here are very high, and the rising power, China, is also in Asia. So if the U.S. does not pay attention to this region or enhance its presence in the region, the U.S. would not be responsible for itself. But this policy has been represented in a way by a lot of people as a way to counter China, as a way to contain China. I think, and of course, Chinese in China there are also people who want to take this over, this kind of rhetoric over, and say, okay, this is against China, but I don't think it was designed to contain China. It's more designed to serve the interests of the U.S. But the U.S. interest does not equal to contain China. So that probably should be clarified.
Your very generous, interpretation of these American people in Asia. Anyhow, Ken? Oh, no. Jonathan?
There is a characteristic Chinese behavior that often asks, what is the hidden meaning that underlies behavior or declarations? And that's very deeply embedded, and it really can't easily change. The danger, actually, as I see it from an American point of view, is when American officials sometimes deny that it's about China, when obviously a lot of it is about China. We had an experience of this sort at Brookings about a year or more ago, and this is with respect to the air-sea battle that Cheng Jie-ho has referred to, where the chief of naval operations, speaking at an open event at Brookings, repeatedly insisted, no, this isn't about China. And then he even said, and I am quoting him literally, that he said that the air-sea battle had relevance to many different kinds of situations, including a global warming scenario in the Arctic. Now, I tried to imagine, would the United States blow up a glacier? Frankly, it made very little sense. And it's precisely those kinds of statements that feed the perception that there is some kind of an underlying meaning. So I would rather that Americans be candid about it. And I think some of them are, some of the officials are, and that's good. It doesn't mean to suggest that Asia's future is totally determined by China. But again, either we get this central relationship right, or we are headed into much more troubled waters, whether it's in the Arctic or anywhere else.
Ken?
2 points. One, the rebalance is, of course, in a substantial way about China, because the rebalance is about Asia, and China is at the center of Asia. Largest economy in the region, fastest growing military in the region, and geographically central. I mean, China is central to Asia. The question is, do you see a constructive relationship with China as central to the success of the rebalance to Asia because China is at the center of Asia? Or do you see effectively focusing on increasing people's confidence around the region who are worried about China, that they do not have to simply make a choice between China and the United States. They have us at least helping them to assure that China will not simply turn its economic power into diplomatic and security advantage. I hesitate to put it this way because it depends on understanding the English terms very well, but the question is whether in some ways China is at the center of the rebalance, the U.S.-China relationship, or whether it is the target of the rebalance. And I think from a White House perspective, it has been consistently at the center, not the target. But we all know that this is a complicated region. We have a complicated government. China has a complicated government. So, but from a White House perspective, I think it has been at the center. Let me just make one other quick comment if I can. The U.S. generally thinks competition is a good thing. Our whole society is based on competition produces better outcomes, more efficient, more dynamic, more innovative, and so forth. So I think when we hear about competition with China or any other country, that's not a negative. Conflict is a negative. So I would encourage not thinking that that rebalancing or a new type of relationship or whatever is designed to, it should be seen as failing if it includes, if we don't eliminate competition. That isn't the issue. The issue is minimizing the chances of real conflict.
Okay, I think that Kim Tae-hyo raised a very provocative, the idea. There is no power transition taking place. It's long. It will take a century for China to catch up with the United States. Therefore, it's better for South Korea to maintain status quo. Cheho, you agree with him? Given your past writings, you may not agree with Tae-hyo's observation or prediction.
That's a very, it's a very tough question. But I think, well, it all depends on how you define power transition. But compared to 20 years ago, I think we already begin to see some changes. Of course, that doesn't mean, of course, just because China surpassed Japan in terms of GDP doesn't mean China's power has taken over Japan. If you look at the number of Nobel Prizes given to Japanese compared to Chinese, that is very evident. But nevertheless, I think the pace of telescoping, pace of catching up by China has surprised many people in the world. There is no doubt. For instance, if you look at the Goldman Sachs report that came out in 2003, it says China will not be able to surpass the United States in GDP by 2050. But now the mainstream projection is between 2020 and 2025. So they telescope by 25 years, so it is fast. So I would say, it's all, future is in the eyes of the beholder. So I don't know, but I think it will be faster than what Teo has projected, in my view.
Okay, Teo, any rebuttal then?
What I said was not about the American predominance in the region, but I emphasize that we don't care who becomes number one, because there will be no dominant single hegemon in the future, at least for 100 years from now on. That was what I'm saying.
Okay, clear. We have a couple of questions from the floor. Okay, it's to Professor Lieberthal. Okay, President Obama is planning to visit here toward the end of this month. Okay, what is the American position on the conflict, history conflict between Japan and South Korea? What kind of gesture or the line would the President Obama take?
Look, I think the American position was highlighted very clearly in The Hague when we worked very, very hard to have a trilateral meeting, President Obama, President Park, and Prime Minister Abe. And the picture that emerged from that of the leaders of Japan and the Republic of Korea shaking hands, we know that did not resolve all issues, but we have made clear in every way we can that we think that their ability to work together where there are common interests is extremely important. I think, frankly, America does not agree with the revisionist views of history that we have seen recently out of Japan. But our hope is that the Japanese government will exercise good judgment and restraint, and B, that those history views do not prevent cooperation where cooperation is in everyone's interest for other issues in the region.
I hope so too. Okay, this is, I think, to Qingguo. Okay, if you read Henry Kissinger's on China, okay, then Henry Kissinger characterized Chinese management strategy for neighboring countries in terms of two elements. One is the whole this tooth and lips and tooth relationship. On the other hand, China tend to prefer managing neighborhood barbarians by utilizing other barbarians. Is this characterization still hold valid?
Oh, I really don't know what that means. I think China's foreign policy is designed to promote China's interests by developing good relationship with all countries, including and especially Chinese neighbors. But of course, this relationship has been troubled by the historical and maritime disputes. I think China has been trying to reach some kind of understanding and settlement, but it has not been very successful on certain issues. Many years ago, Deng Xiaoping came up with a idea with regard how to manage territorial and maritime interest disputes. He said we should insist on sovereignty, shelf disputes, and engage in joint exploration of the resources. Despite the fact that many years have passed since he said this, I strongly believe that this is still valid. This is the way that we can manage our differences while engaged in cooperation. And this is probably the way that other countries, including and China, will have to embrace in the days to come when in dealing with maritime challenges.
Feng, would the North Korea issue become a source of unity or division between China and the United States? But you mentioned that the China and the United States are narrowing their views on North Korean nuclear issue. Therefore, that there is expectation that China and the U.S. would cooperate together on North Korean issue. Do you agree with that idea, or is China going to continue to take side with North Korea in the coming years? Or put a microphone.
I think between the United States to the North Korea policy, I think China's policy to the North Korea as strict as a peaceful resolve this issue. I think this different with the United States. I think maybe United States about deal with North Korean nuclear crisis. America have quite a lot of the military exercise around North Korea.
Mm-hmm.
Also, I think China is worried this military exercise maybe cause some bad interaction between North Korea and South Korea and America. I think this Chinese policy to the North Korea as a patient and strict as a peaceful solution.
Okay, now, Jonathan, what if there is a contingency in North Korea? Is it true that China and the United States have not had any deeper consultation on that issue? You don't have any kinds of coordinated plan to deal with the contingency in North Korea?
Well, again, I'm not here representing the United States government. I think it is fair to say, though, that so far as I am aware, there is certainly nothing in a detailed way that is transpired between the United States and China on these issues. It's a very, very difficult discussion for the two countries to undertake because the essential premise may not be shared. That is to say, there is a widespread belief, I think, in the United States that North Korea cannot continue indefinitely to defy the laws of gravity, economic and political laws of gravity, if there are such laws. China's view seems to be somewhat different, although I think there is growing debate in China about these issues. A question about whether or not North Korean behavior or North Korea's internal circumstances pose direct risks to China. And on that basis, it opens the door to the possibility of some kind of discussion, presumably on a confidential basis. In fact, I think that's the real issue. Could those discussions, if they were to transpire, be kept in absolute confidence between the two leaderships, because if they cannot, it almost defeats the purpose. But I would say, just parenthetically, even looking beyond the possibility of a contingency, and we all, I think, know what that is code language for, there is the larger question of, and this speaks frankly to something that JIA Qingguo raised before, that the test of all these different ideas that get bandied about the future of the U.S.-China relationship is, can you cooperate in practice as opposed to in theory? In theory, in an aspirational sense, who can object to the ideas, the visions that are laid out? But America is often seen as a very pragmatic state. We're trying to find some kind of a way in which, as we say in America, you put meat on the bones of the idea of a new concept of major power relations, and I cannot think of an issue that would be higher on that priority of lists as to whether or not our two countries can cooperate on North Korea's future.
We exceeded this time a little bit, but we have several interesting questions. But for example, what should be South Korean posture regarding American rebalancing strategy and Chinese new models of major power relations? That kind of questions, and what would be the so-called Chinese and American position on six-party talks and etc. But those questions will be reserved for the next session. Okay, this section is we're dealing with mostly major power relations. But here, what we can, I was somewhat surprised. I don't see any conflict here. All cooperation harmonious. Reason is why. You know why? They belong to the same epistemic community. Okay, their whole the JIA Qingguo and Feng are known to be pro-American strategists in China, and also Kenneth Lieberthal and Jonathan POLLACK, they're all known to be very pro-Chinese, or sometimes they are being called the clientelist. But we see one difference between Zheng Jieho and Kim Tae-ho. Zheng Jieho is a China specialist, and Kim Tae-ho is some kind of so-called generic strategist. But other than that difference, there is a kind of so-called epistemic consensus here, and I think that's a good sign. But problem is, when there's a consensus, then there are sources of conflict and potential conflict. We got to watch them out. Thank you very much. Thank you. Let us give a big applause to the panelists.